Welcome to Minister of Culture, Community and Youth, Ms. Grace Fu, Director of the National Gallery, Dr. Eugene Tan, Vice Provost, Graduate Education of the National University of Singapore, Professor Brenda Yeo, Dean of the Faculty of the Arts and Social Science of the National University of Singapore, Professor Robbie Goh, and from the Department of History, Faculty of Arts and Social Science, NUS, Professor Maurizio Pelagi. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Patricia Ong and the MC for today's program. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for the official launch of the Minor in the Art History program and the panel discussion. We shall now begin by inviting Dr. Eugene Tan, our Director of the Gallery, to say a few words. Thank you.
Ms. Grace Fu, Minister for Culture, Community and Youth, Professor Brenda Yeo, Vice Provost, Graduate Education at National University of Singapore, Professor Robbie Goh, Dean, Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, National University of Singapore, Ms. Rosa Daniels, the CEO of National Arts Council, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon and welcome. What is art history and why is it important? These questions lie at the heart of the conversations we will have this afternoon. Art history has been getting some bad press in recent years. Last year, the last remaining exam board in Britain to offer art history at A-levels announced that it's ending the subject. 2018 will be the last year students will be able to take it. And in 2014, the former American president, Barack Obama, also took a dig at art history in a speech when he said that studying art history will not get you a job. You're better off getting some kind of vocational training. There is also the perception that art history is an elitist field of study and that its sole purpose is to provide staff to feed the booming art market, driven by auction houses and galleries, where art history students gravitate towards after graduation. There are, of course, also those, though fewer in numbers, who end up in museums such as here, as curators researching the subject and teaching. So why is the National University of Singapore's Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences and the National Gallery Singapore starting a new art history program? When the signs all around the world point to the decline of art history as a field of study. The public perception of the crisis that art history is facing actually reveals a deeper crisis within the discipline, as with other disciplines within the humanities. I would, however, argue that this crisis also allows us to better understand its significance. Please allow me to explain. Art history is essentially the study of the meanings and the different forms of art through time. Art historians study what artists did, the different forms, styles, and methods in which they express themselves, and why they did what they did, as well as the meaning of what they did. This allows us to better understand the significance of art and artists in history. However, about 30 years ago, in the 1980s, fundamental questions about the historiography and pedagogy of art history began to be raised, questioning the object and methodologies of art history, that it was too constrained by its historicist frameworks to accommodate any productive self-scrutiny and reflexivity. There were calls to revise or abandon what was seen as old-fashioned tenets of art history, such as connoisseurship, monograph writing, and stylistic analysis. This coincided with the introduction of new models of analysis into art history from the field of semiotics, deconstruction, Marxism, anthropology, feminism, and psychoanalysis, just to name a few. As such, art history went through, and is still going through today, an expansion of its boundaries and procedures of study, but also a critical reflection of its methodological assumptions. There was a tension between, on the one hand, the study of art objects and what artists did, within a matrix of established methods, and on the other, the study of how the artists were able to do what they did, the social, political, economic, and epistemological conditions of society that govern the production of art. Therefore, it is within the crisis that we find art history facing that we can ironically also see its significance. I mentioned earlier that amongst other things, art history is a historical study of the meaning of what artists did through the artworks they created. In this expansion of art history to include the socio-economic, political, and epistemological context, the meanings ascribed to what artists did take on a greater significance. It highlights the important roles that art and artists have played in society through history, and also the potential that art has as an agency of change in our societies. It is only through a better understanding of this, enabled by art history, that we can also grow the appreciation of art among the wider public. This is especially so in regions such as Southeast Asia, where we are still in the process of writing our own art histories in a way that does not take the Euro-American paradigm as a point of reference. While we do this through all our exhibitions at the gallery, our exhibition last year, Reframing Modernism, was one in particular in which we re-examined the development of modernism, taking Southeast Asia as a point of departure, looking at the specific conditions which gave rise to modernism in the region and its development. We also have a new publication just out today titled Charting Thoughts, Essays on Art in Southeast Asia, which comprises newly commissioned texts by 25 emerging and established scholars on Southeast Asian art, on various subjects ranging from the 19th century to the present day. Do stop by the publication booth later to pick up a copy. I would like to thank the NUS for sharing our commitment and dedication to promoting art history as a field of study and research. For this new minor, in addition to having NUS modules related to art and visual culture recognized as part of it, our curators have also been working closely with NUS to develop new electives related to their expertise in Southeast Asian art, history, as well as modern and contemporary art. It is my hope that the students coming out of this program will play a role in defining what art history means for our region, and in continuing to write the art histories of Southeast Asia, of the past, as well as histories still being formed and histories of the future. We look forward to working with NUS to cultivate the next generation of art historians, trained in the region and committed to furthering the understanding of our art. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope you'll enjoy the discussions this afternoon.
Thank you, Dr. Tan. Let us now invite Professor Robbie Goh, Dean of Faculty of Arts and Social Science, to say a few words. Professor, please.
Minister for Culture, Community and Youth, Ms. Grace Fu. Director of National Gallery Singapore, Dr. Eugene Tan. CEO of NAC, Ms. Rosa Deng. Vice Provost Graduate Education, NUS, Professor Brenda Yeo. Distinguished panelists and guests. Thank you all very much for joining us today to launch the Art History Minor, a collaborative program between NUS's Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences and the National Gallery Singapore. The inauguration of this program is particularly satisfying for me, with my happy memories of taking art history classes with renowned scholars like W.J.T. Bill Mitchell and Anne Jensen Adams while doing graduate studies at the University of Chicago. While my PhD was in English literature, I can truly say that these art history and theory classes added much to my development as a scholar, academic, and one hopes global citizen as well. I wish the same intellectual and cultural enrichment for younger generations of students today. Art history provides these younger generations with a robust framework to grapple with a world increasingly characterized by differences in cultures, religions, histories, politics, and other factors. Art history is enabling in that it provides a space to relate and transition between the abstract and the visual, the idea and the artwork, the design and the mathematics. Little wonder then that the recent Singapore Biennale saw participating engineers and technology specialists alongside artists. The recent iLight Festival at Marina Bay also saw record visitor numbers as it offered an array of technology, science, and art-driven solutions to address problems faced in the realms of environment, energy, housing, among others. In a digital age too, art history and theory have the potential to grow digital literacy and confidence by growing an understanding of digital art practices and of the way in which digital technologies and cultures intersect with art practices and theories. I would be so bold as to suggest that the Arts History program can add value to the nation in a number of ways. In recent years, Singapore's national discussions have been very much concerned with skills future and the kind of breadth and flexibility of competencies that can prolong one's employment lifespan. One of the key components of this discussion focuses on the inevitable intervention of technology in several areas of our lives and the simultaneous redundancy of human roles in many jobs. A complementary aspect of this discussion encourages our higher education system to shift gears from narrower and monodisciplinary paths to multidisciplinary training. A program like Art History can contribute to this multidisciplinarity in clear ways. In addition, art history is very much involved in heritage preservation, in training people to appreciate and critically engage with the rich plural artistic traditions and legacies of Singapore, the region, and the rest of the world. There is, of course, also the practical side of art history. The discipline grooms candidates to go out and work in its laboratories, i.e. in the museums, galleries, cultural institutions, heritage spaces, public monuments, conservation laboratories, and more. Here, NUS's collaboration with National Gallery Singapore and the latter's extended network of practitioners and institutions becomes invaluable for preparing students for the industry. The discipline also prepares students to become scholars, educators, curators, collectors, conservationists, cultural diplomats, and ambassadors. More importantly, it nurtures future citizens, not as custodians of a Singapore or an ASEAN heritage, but as custodians of a collective global heritage. Less tangibly, but no less importantly, art history plays an important role in nurturing global citizens, in preparing them to address the incessant disruptions, imbalances, and gaps in our global world. With increasing tensions along boundaries of race, religion, and nationality, and we don't have to look too far to see examples of that in the papers every single day, there is an urgent need to comprehend plural ideologies and cultures. Artistic examples from past and current societies remind us of transnational and transcultural networks. They remind us how interconnected the world was and how significant it remains to circulate and exchange goods, ideas, peoples, technologies. Without the meeting of faiths and cultures, we would not have design and engineering feats called the Angkor Wat or the Taj Mahal. Without the interaction between math, biology, and art, we would not have the scientific and artistic marvels of the Italian Renaissance. For the successful launch of this program, our gratitude goes to the following: Minister Grace Fu for gracing this afternoon's launch program, and to our expert speakers and panelists, Ms. Amy Lin, Ms. Mami Kataoka, and Mr. Tang Polian. We thank Dr. Eugene Tan, Director of the National Gallery of Singapore, whose discussions with my predecessor, then Dean Brenda Yeo, led to the successful development of this program. Professor Brian Farrell, Head of the Department of History at NUS, agreed to host the NUS side of the program in the department. Our sincere appreciation to Professor Maurizio Pelleggi, Associate Professor Valerie Wee, and Associate Professor Terence Lee for steering the program with insight and dedication. Thanks also to Dr. Priya Jaradi, who will be teaching in a new minor, for her invaluable input and insights. Ms. Sharon Tan, Director, NUS Center for the Arts, and Ahmad Mashadi, Director, NUS Museums, gave wholehearted support for the program's roadshows, classes, and student projects, among other collaborations. Finally, my thanks to all the curators at the National Gallery of Singapore and lecturers at NUS, who are developing the content and teaching materials with deep commitment and passion. I'm sure the students of this Arts Minor program will be very, very appreciative of their expertise and input and guidance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Goh. May I now invite the guest of honor, Minister of Culture, Community and Youth, Ms. Grace Fu, up on stage to deliver her speech.
Professor Brenda Yeo, Vice Provost, Graduate Education, NUS, Professor Robbie Goh, Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, NUS, Dr. Eugene Tan, Director, National Gallery, Singapore, Ms. Rosa Daniel, Deputy Secretary, NCCY, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to all of you. It is indeed my great pleasure to join everyone here today at the launch of the minor in art history, set up in collaboration between NUS and National Art Gallery. The program marks a welcome partnership between NUS and Gallery, which brings educators and practitioners together to develop capabilities in young Singaporeans who are interested in arts. Thanks to the good work of Dr. Eugene Tan and NUS professors Dr. Maurizio Politi, Associate Professor Valerie Wee, Associate Professor Terence Lee, the program curriculum will situate the study of art history within the local and regional context. We expect the program to remain relevant and practical in the development of Singapore as a center for learning, practice, and discourse in the arts. Singapore's arts and culture sector has made progress, and more Singaporeans are now seeing the values of art. Participation in arts activities has increased, together with visitorship to our museums and heritage institutions. We are also collaborating with arts and culture institutions, such as Centre Pompidou in Paris and the Tate Britain in London, to increase our offerings and bring exciting and new exhibitions to our shows. At the same time, we are committed to raising our artists' profile overseas and growing new audiences for Singapore art through participation in key international events such as the Venice Biennale and Singapore Biennale. As we build our arts ecosystem, we need to acquire knowledge in art history, particularly of Singapore and Southeast Asian art, as well as content development. These skills will support our art professionals in developing and curating content that resonates with Singaporeans. To this end, the study of art history plays an integral role. The ability to understand a work of art in its cultural and historical context connects us to our past, helps us to navigate the present, and enables us to imagine the future. It provides us with the critical and analytical skills to make sense of our society and broaden our understanding of who we are as Singaporeans and how we relate to the rest of the world. The study of art history will also deepen our understanding of Singapore's multi-ethnic, multiracial communities and how they interact with one another to form a uniquely multicultural Singaporean identity. We need more art practitioners to grow and sustain the capabilities of our art and culture institutions. Hence, we welcome programs like the Minor in Art History, which provide additional pathways for young Singaporeans to pursue arts-related careers. I must say that we are delighted in MCCY. It's 2 years in the making. We have been anticipating this for a long time, much longer than we should, I think. So it's really something that Singapore needs, and I think it will be very important in shaping how our cultural institutions will display its work, will communicate its work, and to connect with Singaporeans going forward. Through research programs, we hope to nurture Singapore future generations of art practitioners who can contribute more quality offerings and grow the vibrancy and diversity of Singapore's arts and culture sector. I'm happy to note that the Minor in Art History will benefit from the experience of existing art practitioners. Hence, I would like to commend the curators from the gallery for sharing their time, expertise, and passion for the arts with students as lecturers and supervisors in the program. Students taking the Minor in Art History will also be offered opportunities for on-the-job training through internships with the gallery. This will equip our future art practitioners with the knowledge and practical skills to be relevant to the sector. Today's launch is an excellent example of how academia and our museums can work together to nurture a sustainable base of talent for the arts and cultural sector. We welcome more of such partnerships, which not only support the creation of art, but also open up more avenues for art practitioners to develop their capabilities. So congratulations to NUS and National Gallery Singapore on the launch of the Minor in Art History. I wish the program every success and look forward to contributions by future generations of art practitioners as they take Singapore's art and culture sector even further. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister, for these encouraging words. Before we begin with the panel discussion, we'd like to invite Professor Maurizio Pelagi from the Department of History to introduce the curriculum of the Minor in Art History program.
Minister of Culture, Community and Youth, Ms. Fu, National Gallery of Singapore Chairman, Mr. Xie, National Gallery of Singapore Director, Dr. Tan, NUS Vice Provost for Graduate Education, Professor Yeo, NUS Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences Dean, Professor Goh, distinguished panelists and guests. The occasion we celebrate today is significant for two reasons. First, it inaugurates an unprecedented collaboration between two public institutions, the National University of Singapore and the National Gallery of Singapore, which share an educational mission as well as the objective of contributing to the growth of a more diverse and polyphonic public culture in Singapore. Second, this art history minor marks the initial step towards what I hope will eventually be the establishment of an art history major in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, and perhaps even an art history program, at which point we will throw a much bigger party. In fact, I believe it was high time that NUS, as Singapore's prime academic institution, caught up with the considerable growth in both public and institutional interest in the arts we have witnessed in Singapore since the start of the millennium. This is not to say that until now art history was absent from the NUS curriculum. Kanlaga Sabapati, one of the discipline pioneers in Singapore, whom I warmly salute today, has been teaching it for several decades in what is now the NUS School of Design and Architecture. I have, much more modestly, been teaching a variety of art history courses in FAS for the past 20 years. And indeed, allow me to say that it makes me very proud to see that several among the gallery curators who will be teaching courses for the new minor, as well as other curators who work in other museums and agency of the National Heritage Board, read my undergraduate and graduate courses and wrote honors and master theses under my supervision. Despite specific cultural and geographic characteristics, art making is a common aspect of the human experience across time and space. There is no human society that has not engaged in the production of what we call in English and French art, or arte in Italian and Spanish, from the Latin ars, which literally refers to an embodied skill. The equivalent German term, Kunst, also found in Dutch and Scandinavian languages, is also related to the notion of both skill and knowledge. And indeed, the notion of skill is at the root of both the ancient Greek word for art, techne, and yi in Mandarin, though the compounded term yeshu includes the idea of taste and aesthetic discernment. This is the reason why Pope Julius II had no qualms asking Michelangelo to gild his bed headboard, while the latter was busy covering with fresco the walls and ceilings of the Sistine Chapel. Or why, in 2014, a Shanghai tycoon paid the equivalent of 45 million Singapore dollars to buy an early Ming porcelain cup. Now, how many times have you heard that we live in an age saturated with images, or that a picture speaks 1,000 words? Both statements are, in fact, somewhat mistaken. Images were the primeval form of human communication, and it's also the case that 1,000 words are needed to make sense of a picture. Indeed, the verbal description of a work of art was appreciated as a distinct rhetorical genre since classical antiquity. This is something the Greek call ekphrasis. The history of art, on the other hand, was conflated until the 19th century with the history of artists. Its development as an academic discipline in Europe paralleled the institution of national museums and the emergence of an art world where artists, critics, and the public met and exchanged opinions in museums, galleries, and printed forums. In this sense, the intellectual roots of art history are located firmly within the intellectual project of modernity. We, alas, have moved beyond modernity, or perhaps have never been modern, as the anthropologist Bruno Latour will have it. Whichever the case, the global flows of capitals and commodities, but also cultural values and practices, which for sure has been going on for quite a long time, has impelled in recent decades a questioning of modern categories of knowledge, including art history, which in many universities now often replaced by the more encompassing domain of visual cultures. The designation of our new minor as being in art history was a conscious decision Eugene Tan and we in FAS took in our earlier conversations. The rationale for this choice was to lay emphasis on the foundations of art history as an academic discipline. At the same time, we were adamant that the minor's curriculum should provide an understanding of the historical development of art as global as possible. So, while one must be wary of nativist projections of culture as expressing some intrinsic national or racial genius, whether Western or Asiatic, the plurality of art making as an essential cultural practice entails familiarizing students with distinct artistic traditions, as well as their commonalities and historic points of convergence. As I mentioned earlier, the synergy between FAS and the gallery is the pivot of the minor curriculum. In addition to the foundational survey course, the modules available to students in this semester and then in the next academic year, 2017-2018, include such subjects as modern and contemporary art, Indian, Chinese, Japanese, and Southeast Asian, as well as Western art, East-West artistic interactions, collecting, curatorship, and museology, as well as the theory and methodology of art history and the philosophy of art. Therefore, I want to thank those who have collaborated to the formulation of the minor proposal, namely my colleagues Valerie Wee and Terence Lee, as well as Professor Yo, who, as the previous Dean of the Faculty of Art and Social Sciences, supported the minors project. I also want to thank those who will be involved in the teaching of the modules, including the minors convener and foundational instructor, my colleague Priya Jaradi, and all the gallery curators, Sai Hang, Lo Sasui, Phoebe Scott, Sang Eugene, Shabir Hussain Mustafa, Russell Storer, and Adele Tan, together with all the lecturers in the various Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences departments, including English Language and Literature, History, Southeast Asian Program, the Department of Philosophy, whose courses qualify towards the minors requirement. So, let me close with a famous cinematic line, and you have to picture me wearing a trench coat and a fedora hat. I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
Thank you, Professor Palaji. I'm sure many of us in the audience today who are NUS alumni wish that we had such amazing modules during our times. We now come to the panel discussion. The topic of today's discussion is the rather contentiously put question, does art history matter? I now invite our three speaker and moderator up on stage. Please join me in welcoming artist Tan Kuo Liang, art critic, co-founder and editor of Art Review Asia, Miss Amy Lee, chief curator of the Mori Art Museum, Miss Mami Kataka, And back on stage once again, Dr. Eugene Tan. Dr. Eugene Tan is director of the National Gallery Singapore, which he joined in 2013. He holds a PhD in art history from the University of Manchester and has extensive experience as a curator and educator.
Thank you, Pat. Well, before I introduce more about our speakers today, you may be wondering why there isn't an art historian on the panel. Apart from the obvious that we wanted to show what other roles and professions you can go on to do with art history, because art historians, it's quite predictable that they go on to research about art history after graduating from art history. But also, as Maurizio spoke a bit about T.K. Savapathy earlier. So we had invited him to be part of the panel. He's not here today, but he has sent me a paper which I will read on his behalf. So I don't think T.K. Savapathy needs an introduction amongst those that are familiar with the art world, but those that are not. He's an adjunct associate professor in the Department of Architecture at the National University of Singapore. He's Singapore's foremost art historian, curator, and critic. And for 4 decades, he has devoted his life to the research, documentation, and support of contemporary visual arts in Singapore and Malaysia. He has written countless articles, books, catalogues, and monographs, making an invaluable contribution to the study of art in Southeast Asia. And is well respected for his scholarship and beloved for his tireless advocacy of art and artists of Singapore and Malaysia. So his paper is really a history of the art history in Singapore. And I must stress, all the words are his, so I'm just a surrogate to read it out. And the title of his paper is Minor in Art History Now, Minor in Art History Then. So for those of you that have met Kanaga, try and pretend it's him speaking up here. One of the purposes of this gathering is to publicly mark the inauguration of an academic program for the study of the history of art. There is now in the History Department of the National University of Singapore a course of study that is packaged as a minor in art history. It consists of modules delivered at introductory levels on scholarship of art histories, of arts histories that are required for students wishing to pursue such studies in this discipline a little more, sufficiently to qualify for acquiring a minor accreditation. Details regarding this program's objectives, structure, curriculum, teaching, and resources have presumably been described. I will not be detained by dealing with any of them. The initiative for installing such a course in this university is from the National Gallery Singapore, whose curators are also scheduled to teach some of the modules in it. I commend the gallery for spearheading this move and convey unreserved admiration to its curators and director who are setting out to teach. Again, I must remark here that all the words are TK's own words. And the paper has not been edited in any way. Curating and teaching are immensely and separately demanding. The two, i.e. teaching histories of art and curating, are certainly not similar. They are not obviously matter-of-factly connected with one another either. I say this starkly to remind us what is at stake and to underline my admiration for those embarking upon this dual track. We, the curators and I, are meeting separately this week ahead to talk about these matters, to discuss tasks and expectations for developing capacities, resources, and readying for more hard work. We promise exciting times ahead. The instituting of history of art as a minor is not an isolated occurrence in recent times. The minor NUS is not a standalone feature in tertiary education here. In pointing to comparisons and parallels, I'm not demeaning interest in the gallery's initiative and not trivializing NUS's offering. Neither am I setting out to dampen the festive tone of this gathering. Obviously, it is important to know one's neighborhood, to know who is in it and what each is up to, and to know it well. It is important to know one's neighborhood even as those who make it up are not particularly neighborly, including oneself. I list institutions and facilities for undergraduate studies. Students enrolled in the School of Art, Design and Media, Nanyang Technological University, are required to study histories of art during their 4-year undergraduate years, which are devoted predominantly to studio practice. Over these years, they could gather sufficient academic credits from required and elective art history modules to be accredited with a minor in this discipline. Double majors are not unknown in our universities. Again, at NTU, the schools of art, design, and media, along with the humanities and social sciences, offer programs in which undergraduates are able to pursue the study of art history as a double major, compiling it with a discipline from the humanities and social sciences. Such pairings are highly desirable in recent developments in art history. Realignments in teaching and research of arts histories are oriented in these directions. Courses in art history are inserted in programs in academies such as Nanyang Academy of Fine Arts, LaSalle College of the Arts, the National Institute of Education, and so on. They may be affiliated with principles and approaches that are somewhat recognizable as art historical, although extents to which they develop or advance studies of art histories as a discipline rigorously and relatedly is open to debate and discussion. In these respects, are we beholding a dawning of a new age here in Singapore? A new age in which the study of art is a worthy undertaking, pursued with interest and conviction? I step back a little in proposing answers and begin by raising related questions. Firstly, are there precedents for any of this? Is there, for instance, and secondly, a history to the study of the history of art in Singapore? If there is, should one know about it? Yes, there is, and yes, one needs to know it, especially on an occasion such as this. And it is not pretty. It is not a pretty, elevating story. It is a story marked by a visionary beginning, an awkward interruption, a resurgent reappearance, and finally by abandonment. The abandonment is so complete that traces of it ever having existed are not visible and felt. I say that one needs to know this past and this history, especially at an event as this, because that past, that history, unfolded in this university in which a minor in art history is now offered. This dramatic episode spanned 22 years, from 1954 to 1972. They have affected me deeply, initially as a student, as I began studies in the history of art in 1958 in this university, and subsequently when I intended to return and teach, only to be told that history of art would no longer be taught and that the art museum in the university would be closed and its collection shunted to the National Museum. These closures aborted the development of art history here. These closures stunted the growth of the world of art in Singapore. I have spoken and written on these matters, see especially My Road to Nowhere, The Quick Rise and the Long Fall of Art History in Singapore, 2010. I briefly recall the history of teaching art history in this university so as to fortify our efforts today and propel us forward confidently and with unwavering conviction. The commission was set up in 1948 to submit proposals for establishing a university in the then colonies of Singapore and Malaya. We are amazed to read the commissioners recommending that history of art be taught formally at the undergraduate level, and even more amazed to hear them saying that a faculty appointment be made at a senior level for this. The teaching of history of art would, the commission reports, and I quote, in fact, fit well into many courses such as languages, literature, history. It would be essential if at some future time architecture be taught at the university. Michael Sullivan was appointed as a senior lecturer in the history of art. He taught courses in it from 1955 to 1960. A 2-year course was offered as a minor. I enrolled in it and so began my studentship and life in the study of art. Sullivan set up an art museum in the university, the very first museum of art here, envisaging it as a center for learning Southeast Asian art and for enjoyment. He assumed a double role as lecturer in art history and as the museum's curator. Yes, the heartbeat of this museum, its collection and its programs were directed towards illuminating Southeast Asian cultures consisting of art derived from historical traditions and of the modern. Sullivan was the first to install the modern in Southeast Asia in an art museum and write on the modern with art historical interests. In doing so, he installed Cheong Soo Ping as an artist of immense significance historically. Between 1960, the year that Sullivan departed, and 1963, teaching ceased and the museum hibernated. In 1963, William Willets was appointed as curator and lecturer. A minor in art history was revived. For Willets, as for Sullivan, Southeast Asia was the primary focus of museology and art history. New fields were developed, defined, and represented, especially for ceramics and textiles. During Wurlitzer's term, Constance Shears completed a master's degree in Southeast Asian textiles. She was subsequently appointed as the first curator of art in the National Museum Art Gallery. The exhibitions that she organized and the publications that she produced are deeply underlined by historical premises. Constance has retired and is rarely visible. During Wurlitzer's term 2, Roxana Brown submitted a master's dissertation on Southeast Asian ceramics. Her work in this field is upheld as foundational. Roxana died in tragic circumstances in 2008. Wurlitzer's term ended in 1973. A decision was made to close this section. Art history was no longer taught, and the collection was stored and partially displayed in the National Museum. It was returned to the university and stored in the basement of the estate office building. I was asked to reinstall it. In doing so, in 2001, I invited Constance Shears and Roxana Brown to collaboratively reinstate it, thereby reforging connections with the history of art in this university. These are recounted in Past, Present, Beyond, Renaissance of an Art Collection, edited by T.K. Sabapati in 2002. In 1980, I was appointed to teach courses in the history of art in the Department of Architecture in this university. I still do. It appears that I had finally come home, and yet I had and have not, as a discipline of art history, had not advanced at all. A minor in art history was offered some 22 years ago. It is re-offered now in 2017. Do we need to be tethered to the starting blocks, to be running on the spot at the running line perennially? I do not think so, even as institutional support appears as meager and somewhat tentative. Those who are involved in teaching histories of art need to doggedly consolidate pedagogies, strengthen resources for learning, and maintain rigor in developing practices of art history as a discipline. We do so individually, collegially, and with sustained conviction. This is the one way in present circumstances. I thank Eugene Tan for reading this paper. The views, opinions, and perspectives are mine. I support each and every individual who is involved in teaching modules in the art history minor offered by NUS. My support is unwavering. T.K. Sabapati. And now let me introduce more about our speakers today. First up, we'll have Mr. Tan Kuo Liang, who's an artist and writer based here in Singapore. His practice revolves around how the space of painting and writing can be charged with affect and otherness. Kuo Liang completed his BA in Fine Art and Critical Studies at Goldsmiths College in London. And as part of his MFA at the Glasgow School of Art, he attended the Erasmus Exchange at the Städelschule in Frankfurt, Germany. His work has been exhibited and collected in Asia and Europe, including his first solo exhibition, Dead Play at Space Cotton Seed, and The Trouble with Painting Today in the Palm House Gallery in London. He's a recipient of the National Arts Council Scholarship for Visual Art and is a contributing writer on various art journals, catalogs, and websites. More recently, he was an artist in residence at the NTU CCA Singapore residency program and currently runs the project space Peninsula. We also have Ms. Amy Lin, an art critic, co-founder and editor of Art Review Asia. Amy started to work with the British art magazine Art Review in 2013, and in the same year founded its sister magazine, Art Review Asia, a critical magazine distributed across Asia and dedicated to critical and artistic practice in the region, as well as Asian discourses in international and in inter-Asian contexts. Prior to this, she was the founding editor of Leap, a bilingual art magazine of contemporary Chinese art. Her practice ranges from writing, editing, art criticism, to curating and art production. Amongst other things, she was featured by Apollo Magazine and 40 Under 40 Asia Pacific. She's currently based in Shanghai. And last but not least, we have Ms. Mami Kataoka, who's a chief curator from the Mori Art Museum. She's a leading curator and writer in the field of contemporary Asian art. She has been the chief curator of the Mori Art Museum since 2003, where exhibitions included Roppongi Crossing, Sensing Nature, more recently Ai Weiwei, Li Mingwei, and N.S. Harsha. She was also the co-artistic director of Roundtable, the 9th Gwangju Biennale in 2012, as well as the forthcoming director of the Sydney Biennial to be held next year. And she's currently working on Sun Shower, a large exhibition of Southeast Asian art to open in July. So first up, I think we'll have Guo Liang come and speak. And would you like to speak there, or would you like to come? Okay, please come up.
Hi. I'm going to have some slides of images of my work just running in the background so that maybe for those of you who don't really know me or what I do, there's some kind of points of reference visually. I'm gonna read a bit and I'm going to veer off as well. So it will be like a short one so we have more time for discussion later. So does art history matter? Because I know there's a lot of art historians in the audience, friends who are art historians. I will first begin by saying that I am in no way an art historian, and neither does my own art practice deal directly with art historicity. But amongst the things I do make these very peculiar objects. They are called paintings. And in engaging with the practice of painting, I inadvertently have to engage with its history, or shall I say histories, since the history of anything depends really on the stories you tell in relation to where you are, or at least where you might imagine yourself to be. For a long time, the story of Western art as we know it was closely entwined with the story of painting, and for many, learning about either meant being acquainted with both. And I guess that was what I did. This is, of course, not the case now. An artist who makes films, for example, might find the history of cinema more relevant. A curator who is also an activist might be more interested in political history. And an art researcher in this part of the world may well prefer to situate his or discourse in relation to native folklores or the field of anthropology. So what are we talking about when we speak of art history today? Here, in this museum, where the histories of Southeast Asian art are written, and to whom might this form of historical discourse matter? As you can tell by now, I have more questions than answers when it comes to the topic of art history. Like a lot of my peers, my own art education consists of a questionable concoction of visual, cultural, media, gender studies, with the occasional philosophy and art history thrown in the mix. Critical theory, I think that's what they call it, a term some art historians I know mention with a kind of disdain. And I think it's interesting that Eugene started off by actually talking about a crisis to launch. Nothing better to launch something with a crisis. So does art history matter to me personally? As an artist, my interest in it is actually a very simple one. I'm not concerned with what I can do for art history. I'm more interested in what art history can do for me and what it may allow me to say, to make, or to become. Art history not as an end, but as a means. Art history as a kind of stage. Last summer, I spent a couple of months in Germany working alongside a group of other painters, sculptors, and performers. During this time, we talked a lot about each other's work, as well as other artists whose practice we felt connected to in one way or another. Two things struck me about these exchanges. First is how conversations between artists are often made up of stories about other artists. And this includes gossips, a lot of gossips. In fact, it is sometimes difficult to tell when one's own art story ends and others begin. This is also the case when I talk to art historians. Second is how acutely aware certain artists are of where their artistic impulses come from. This understanding of one's artistic lineage may manifest itself in aesthetics, attitudes, humor, and even peculiar neurosis. It helps artists choose between what to accept and what to reject, what to negate and what to make visible. This articulation, either in words or as gestures in work, forms the basis of one's artistic language. A brushstroke is a brushstroke is a brushstroke, except it is not. A painterly mark on the flat bed plane of American abstraction is not the same as a smear on the European tableau. The mechanical blur of a Gerhard Richter cannot be more different than the sustained meditation of Agnes Martin or Li Yufang. And Sigmar Polke is the bad dad of painting who spawned a whole generation of tricksters and jesters with his sardonic wit. What are these marks, painterly or otherwise, but traces of subjects now suspended in the space of art history? It occurred to me quite early on that history, beyond being a burden, could also be like a kind of inheritance. Except this is a special kind of bequest that cannot be handed from hand to mouth, nor can it be simply taken at will. No, I'm not talking about the self-knowing appropriation of historicity so prevalent in the art of past decades. Nor am I suggesting art history as a kind of empty validation, an exercise in the citation of stylistic jargons. I think this historical inheritance I'm talking about is something more visceral, something hardwired in our DNA, which we long seek, both as makers and viewers of art. Rather than seeing art history as a series of conventions only to be followed or radically deconstructed, I would like to propose that we reimagine it as a kind of place, a place where we can go and find ourselves in the company of others, to make, think, argue, write, in the presence of their traces, gestures, and stories. So what might such a place look like in an artwork, in a piece of writing, or as a physical space? And this physical space could be like a museum or a studio. And here I quote a little bit by John Cage. When you start working, everyone is in your studio. The past, your friends, enemies, the art world, above all, your own ideas. All are there. But as you continue painting, they start leaving one by one, and you are left completely alone. Then, if you are lucky, even you leave. If appropriation is a form of allegory, a speech in dead language testifying to the end of history, then invocation, to borrow a term from writer Jan Vervoort, is about giving speech back to the ghosts of history. There's no way of knowing if these ghosts might come to be our friends, lovers, or haunt us as enemies, but in allowing them to return to the stage of art, or in this case, to the stage of art history, so to speak, we ourselves become as yet historical subjects performing in the present. To this end, I think the impulse of an art historian and an artist can be quite different. It is not about the simple opposition between facts and fiction, but for artists, history only matters when it can enliven or be enlivened. Speaking of which, I would like to end this very short sharing today by evoking the words of John Berger, who sadly passed away recently. For me, Berger is one writer who has the ability to animate art history. In writing about painting and time, he described the space of art as one of timelessness, a place outside time. If art history matters, it is because the now, the contemporary, will always escape us. And if art were to have any chance of gesturing towards the present, it can perhaps only do so via a different temporality. And this is perhaps where art history matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Guo Liang. Next, can we invite Amy to share her perspective on the subject?
Hello, everyone. Thanks, National Gallery, to have me here. It's a great honor to be here to be part of the panel discussion to celebrate the birth of this art history minor. Congratulations, FASS and US and National Gallery. So, does art history matter? Yeah, the answer, of course, is yes. And yes, to start my my part, I would love to share two kind of like realities I've been living in, which probably can describe, does art history matter, or what does it matter? How does it matter to people? So on my way to the airport to fly here, my phone, I always got this push notification on my phone, which is pushed by from this WeChat social media application, and they are all from two groups that I am in. One is they're in Chinese, and in English they mean. One is the sharing group of art historians. That's a group of 245 people. Some of them, they are my friends. Some of them I never know, but we do. We have this group in which we have this group on WeChat in which we share like informations of mainly like lectures and exhibitions, writings, and if there is something interesting related to the theme of art history, then we will share it. And the second group I'm in, it's a smaller. It is called, translated in English, it is called Group to Deal with Daily Academic Issues. So 140-something some members in this group, in which actually we do the same thing as we do in the sharing group of our historians. So this is a layer of the reality I'm living in, like which gives me this impression that our history is really something big. But I think this is just like a one layer. The other layer is actually our history is something like maybe not so close to normal people's daily life. On my flight from Shanghai here to Singapore, I was sitting in the at this seat where I could see what some of the other passengers were watching on their screen on the entertainment system. And I was thinking of what does our history mean to these people. Then I saw on one of those screens, someone is watching the film. What is the name? The film Inferno, which is adapted from the novel of the fiction of Dan Brown, and it's a film about. So it's a film about this, just like all the other Dan Brown fictions. So if you have some basic knowledge of art history, or if you are interested in it, then you probably can see more or get more information in this when you are viewing this film. And then that also reminds me of the other day when I was watching this film, the latest feature film of Taiwanese director Hou Xiaoxian, The Assassin, Nie Yingyang. And I think for many people, even they are not in the academic field or they are not art professionals, but if they have had any reading of art history, Chinese art history, then they probably can appreciate more in this film. Like they can talk about, maybe they can make comments of the architecture, the teapot, and the paintings inside the setting of the film. Then a second thing is, then I think maybe for those people who are really into Chinese art history, they can also recognize actually the art direction of this film is quite influenced by Li Keran's landscape painting. That's the traditional ink painting. So this is just a few thoughts before I'm here. So I understand that I'm invited to be here to share some of the like basic some knowledge of art history in China and art history education in China. So I did some research. Oh, maybe it's better to make it clear that actually my background is literature. So my background is humanity, which means I'm trained in philosophy. I was trained in philosophy, literature, and history. Then I got my MA in comparative literature. So, okay, so back to the art history in China. So actually, there is a classical discipline of art history in China with a really rich tradition. It is not, in English it is also called art history, but in Chinese it's called 史论 and 画论. 史论, that means study on history. So it's a more classic discipline before the modern concept of art history is introduced to China. And this 史论, or the study on history, on art history, actually is particularly a critical type of histories of paintings. And also 画论, that is on painting, which is like history of painting, of its concept, and the criticism of it. So just name a few literature, classical pieces of 画论, and then you know how rich the history is. Like pre-Tang Dynasty, there is 画品, that's two-taste paint, and like a 魏晋申圣流华赞, that's the best paintings from the Wei Jing period of time, which was actually written by a painter, Gu Kaizhi, and also a scholar. Then during the period of Tang Song and Yuanming and Qing, so this 史论, this tradition of 史论的话 was always developing, never stopped. Even until recent time, or we call it modern time, artists like Wu Guanzhong and Zhang Daqian, they all had their own writings that we can categorize into 画论. And this tradition of 画论has formed the very Chinese classical art history. Then what we call art history now, or especially art history that is related to my field, which is contemporary art, actually started very late. What I know is the first graduate students, BA, of art history from the Central Fine Art Academy, they were graduated in 1985. And they were 10 students, among whom there are some people who are actually playing the very important role in today's art, contemporary art thing, like Hou Hanru, who's a curator, and Fei Dawei, a curator and art historian, and Wen Puling, who's very important in his practice in performance arts in 1990s and early 2000s. And at the same year of 1985, there's also Mr. Zhu Qingsheng graduated as a MA, got his MA degree, and who graduated from the art history department, and who Mr. Zhu actually now is leading the visual art and image study center in Peking University. So it's no longer a fine art academy; it goes to the university. And at the same, Mr. Zhu's, and also I'm not sure if you are familiar with his name, like Yi Ying, very important art historian, and Kong Chang'an, Ying Jinan. They were all very important. They played quite an important role in the 1990s, 2000s, and even now. So I think 1985 is a very important year, not only because of this, what we now call 85 art movement, but also because there are so many things happening that year, and there are some of them are of quite some importance to the history of art history in China. For example, in April, there was this, we call it Huangshan Summit, where art theorists and artists, and they were gathered together in Huangshan, a very beautiful mountain area, and to raise their new concept of art. That was in April. Then the next month, Zhao Wuji, who has been in France for many years, and he went back to China, and in Zhejiang, Hangzhou, he ran this 1 month painting class, which brought quite some new concept, or the European brought back his European practice to artists, to students who at the time were really who had very few contact with art outside of China. And then the next month in June, people in Fujian, that's the south part of China, south province in China, there are few students in Fujian Normal art school, fine art school. They founded this group called the Fujian M Modern Arts group, and among those members, when there is Cai Guoqiang, and that they had their own exhibition, and also they, in the same month, on the art journal 美术, which is fine arts, for the first time, the Venice Biennale was introduced to China. Then the next month, it's a very important. There is one very important article was published on the same magazine, 美术. That was Gao Minglu's the schools of recent painting, oil paintings. So for the first time, Gao Minglu, as an art historian, started this concept such as like trauma painting, and like 乡土自然主义, that is countryside naturalism. And just 2 months later, for the first time, there is a series award, and artists and series such as Gu Wenda, Li Xiaoshan, and many others, they got their award in this thing. Then next month, another very important text was published. It is Li Xiaoshan's 中国画之我见. That's Mr. Li Xiaoshan's my opinion on Chinese painting. That's a very important painting on traditional, like ink painting in China. So there are many I can list, like it can last for perhaps 1 hour, but I will stop here. So what I have listed before, just above, was just trying to picture this year. And I think it's very important to understand with this that actually the first generation of art historian who works in contemporary art, they don't just study history. They are actually also witnessed and participate the history. And they of course, they write a history, but this is a history in which they themselves played a role. So they function so their works not just include like dealing with archive, So they collect, they protect, they do research on the archive, and they are also critics, which means they have to develop and publish their critical thinking right after when those shows, those works are created. So they need to respond to them almost like immediately. So this has ultimately makes them not only history writer, but also history creator, I think. And also one of the very important roles I think they have played is translation. That is to introduce the Western series and also Western art history achievements into China. So that was that was a period of time that was really very exciting and important. Now I'm going to let me switch to now. So take the Central Fine Arts Academia as an example, because the art history major in that school is one of the best in China. So this major actually, when the undergraduates enter the school, they are in this department called 美术学, that is the fine art. So, that's the study on fine art. So the first 2 years, it's just like a basic or fundamental courses. And the third year, they started to choose from 3 majors. One is art history, one is culture heritage, and one is art management. And the art management actually is getting bigger now, while art history is having a very difficult time at this moment. Then the fourth year, basically everyone is starting from the third year, after they choose their direction, then they will have the specialized courses and selected courses. Then the fourth year, that's the thesis and everything. Since 2013, the academy decided that the students don't need to really decide which major they're going to choose at the third year, which means in the third year you can just freely select courses from 3 different directions or majors, which is really good. And for the first, as I said, for the first 2 years, first year and the second year, so it's the basic courses. Basically, it's we call it 两史一论, so 2 histories and 1 theory. 2 history, that's the Chinese art histories, that's the classic art history, and the other history is the Western art history. So obviously, we need more study on the Southeast Asia history, art history. And Lun, the theory, that's the art theory. And assess... Sorry?
To bring your presentation to an end, maybe we can come back to it again later during the questions.
Oh, okay.
Do you want to finish on what you were saying, sir?
Okay, so yeah, maybe I can come back later with this. Then there is another thing I want to share here is the writing of Chinese contemporary art history. And there are basically 3 publications that are really important. And one of them is Gao Minglu's History of Contemporary Chinese Art, 1985 to 1986, and which was later republished under the name in 2007 under the name 85 Art Movements. So why I think this publication is so important because for the first time, 80s was raised as a periodical entirety in the writing of art history. And the Gao Minglu divided this period into 3 sections. So that's the post-Cultural Revolution period, then the very important 85, then the post-85. And one thing that is also impressive is that in his writing of this book, he has...
Sorry, man, can I let you bring your paper to an end? So we can may have a...
It will take a while, but maybe I can just stop here and wait for your questions.
Okay, thank you. And last but not least, we have Ms. Mami Kataoka.
Thank you. I'll try to do it in 15 minutes, the time that I was given. Because I'm not art historian, but I look at history as a curator at the museum. So the talk that I wanted to share with you is my thought on this question: does art history matter, from exhibitionary practices through 4 projects that I have worked on recently or are working on at the moment. And when we talk about art history, one of the way that I kind of associate with art history is when I did Lee Mi-wei exhibition. It was a solo exhibition, but the exhibition is called Lee Mi-wei and His Relations. So I wanted to see how his practices, which is more or less came from so-called relational aesthetics from 1990s. And so often, particularly from the West, he could be interesting compared with artists like Riku Tirabanija, who are from this region. But also, I had an idea, maybe we can look at Mi-wei's practices from different ways. And for instance, one of his work called The Stone Journey is the original stone from Ice Age that he picked up from New Zealand, and he cast it in bronze and put 2 together on this platform, and then asked collector, if you collect his works at certain time of the life, that you have to throw away either original stone or a casted bronze part, which is more important than the other. And this was asking quite interesting question, because she had 11 sets of these, and none of the collector had done it yet. And but also I was looking at this quite interesting work by Yves Klein from 1962, who had this performance called the transfer of the zone of immaterial pictorial sensibility. And what he did is he was trying to give a value to this invisible pictorial zone, and he was asking collector to acquire this right to own this invisible pictorial zone. And then if you come and buy this invisible zone, you get this gold bar, pieces of gold bars, and then but you have to throw away half of them. And so it was an interesting sort of relationship with what Mi-wei did to ask us the question about what is the value, where the value lies. And but also some of other works by Mi-wei is this is called the dining project, that 1-to-1 that he invites the visitors by lottery, that you can have a dinner with artists in the museum after the museum closed. Or you can even sleep in the museum 1-to-1 if you are selected. And so this is the piece that you can probably 7 to 10 people could experience during the whole duration of the exhibition. A very intimate relationship. It's very different from so-called relational aesthetics. And but I was also looking at his practices like this in association with artists like Alan Kaplow, who was very famous for these happenings in 60s. But after going through these happenings time in 60s, he went to this idea of the activities. And activity is more person to person, like one-to-one. So he left all these instructions or recordings for us to be able to do this at any moment. So one of the examples is called the comfort zones, that these are instructions by him, that you sit, person A and B, sit within some sort of distance in a different rooms, but when think of other person very strongly, and when you feel that person very strongly, you call him. And then you say now. And so it's kind of a telepathy kind of inspiration performances, but you can do it at your house. And there is no audience needed. But it's kind of very intimate relationship with A and B was instructed in a way that you can do anytime. But this is also comfort zone, that A can run to B, and then you can stop where there is the most comfortable zone. And that is something you always experience within a rush hour train. If someone is so close to you, it's uncomfortable already. So that is the moment that you think of the comfort zone. And these are remaining as an archive and then also activity booklet. And so he plans that you can do at any time. And this is how one of the examples that how I associated Lee Ming-wei together with some of the marks of the art history. And these were exhibited in a space, the exhibition space, area called Works of Relationality. So I showed 10 or 11 artists and thinkers and scholarships to compare with what Lee Ming-wei does. And another initiative I started in 2014 at the Mori Art Museum is so-called MUM Research. And because at the museum, normally you see the piece of art, works of art, and art history comes as a sort of context and how these works are being made. But I thought maybe what if we change the position of history or context and works in a reversed position, so that MUM Research started to borrow existing exhibition. At the first one, MUM Research 1, was called Great Crescent. It was a comparative study of post-war avant-garde performance activities in Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan, initially curated by Parasite in Hong Kong. And I invited them to restage by adding some of our Japanese elements. But I made these kind of timeline in comparison Japan, Korea, Taiwan throughout 60s towards the early 70s. And I must say, I love timelines. I love looking at timelines, particularly in these sort of comparative ways, so that you have better understanding what was happening in Japan at the time, and then Korea and Taiwan. And this was really the first time that the post-war performance art was compared in this way in Japan. And also together with social political movements, because it was a very important part of how and why these performances emerged from that time. And so we had some of the pictures from the newspaper and then also text, lots of text. It's almost overwhelming. And of course, a lot of people complain, no way we can read everything in an exhibition space. But it was okay because it was just an experiment, how these contexts could be regarded as more important as an outcome or a piece of art. And we can also show some of the videos from the time, so that which normally you only see it on still images, but we could find some of the moving images. And then also some of the magazines around that time, that are some of those half striptease street performances were being talked about on a general magazine, but not in the art magazines. So there are a collection of general sort of graph magazine, a picture magazine that the people are talking about. What is underground? And what is this so-called performance art? But that was a way for the artists to let themselves know nationwide without internet. So they knew how to make them famous. So these are some of the examples of the group of young artists wearing underwear over the trousers and walking down the street, and also some of the sort of naked performances. And but we could also look at the timelines of how many of these performance collectives through 50s and 70s in Japan are very active in a very concentrated time. And gradually it kind of disappeared in the early 70s. And yes, to also compare with some of the first demonstration for contemporary art in Korea in late 60s. And then also, this is also like Yves Klein kind of a performance that they knew about Yves Klein through magazines and newspaper. And some of the other people are doing outdoor performances. And then for MUM Research 1, I was able to invite Mr. Yoshihiro Kato, who was a leader of Zero Dimension, who was walking down the street with underwear over trousers. And he's so active still that he can speak about the energy of the time. And it was very important for me to hear the actual person from 60s could tell us about those stories to bring the energy back to now. So history doesn't remain as something that you learn from school, but it's more about emotion of the time. And so these are some of the curators we worked together, and it was very interesting to invite those scholars. And then it continues to my interest on Roberto Chabet, a very important figure from Philippines, but quite underestimated outside of the region or country. And Ringo Bunoan was a student of him, but had intensive research on him. So again, we made my favorite timeline, and to see him as an artist and curator, and also he was one of the first director for art gallery in CCP, Culture Center in Philippines, and he made a very important role towards the development of contemporary art in Philippines. And so we could show some of the letters that he was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, that he could see Documenta, Münster, and Venice Biennale in 1968. And that was the most sort of turmoil time of the European and artist students' uprising. And I'll run through next one. Ernest Harsher Charming Journey is another exhibition that I'm putting on now at the Moriarty Museum. It is on view until June 11th, so you can still come and see. And this art is from a place called Mysore in southern India. And it's not necessarily so known unless you are practicing Ashtanga yoga. And but I thought it's important for my audience to know that where he's coming from, because his local cultural context is super important to understand what he does. So not only art history, but also this kind of Disneyland looking palace is a Mysore palace, because Mysore was kingdom for over 400 years. And every Sunday they light up like a Disneyland. And but also in his neighbors, there are so many important South Asian cultural heritage in Belulu or Halebidu, all are world heritages. And such important understanding to see all these, for instance, repetition of animals and miniature sculptures was a part of architecture and also sculptural development. And but also to go to his painter practice, you can look at the people does it. It's called a rangoli. It's a floor drawing that every morning the women does, and then also this yellow cow. It is amazing. I saw so many yellow cow in Mysore because they have this festival once in a year to clean the cow by putting turmeric all over the body, and so kill the germs. And but that's really part of his everyday life, and also going through the market that he goes and looking at the vegetables, and then also the beautiful colors of the women wearing sari, and that appears in his paintings like this. It's called "Come Give Us a Speech," and he painted 2,000 small figures, and everyone is of course different. But you can also look at some of the figures like the thinkers of Rodin and also Frida Kahlo, and you can at least find 10 artistic superstars in this painting, and that's why art history matters. And but also some. And also some of the paintings looks like abstract expressionism, but also having these figures in the middle. It's very awkward, quite interesting approach from abstract and also figurative paintings. And he does all these installations and the vast paintings. But I made this special room again called the resource room for N.S. Harsha, Mysore, and India for my audience to give some context of his drawings and also some of the historical paintings from Mysore, because India has a different painterly history, and you can't really say Indian miniature because it's mostly talking about northern India. But where he comes from, southern India, has a different painterly history. So we are happy to borrow these two beautiful paintings from a local collector so that we can actually see them. And together with some of his comic collections and where his painting comes from. And together with some of these drawings and practices, so that how these practices goes into a larger painting like this. This one is more or less 24 meters long, large paintings. And lastly, I wanted to mention about what I'm doing for the coming Biennale of Sydney. And I'm interested in the archive of the Biennale of Sydney because Biennale is one of the has longest history in the region from 1973. And this was a poster and also cover of the catalog together with the founder Franco Belgiano Nettis, and with even this lady with a kimono is a Japanese sculptor called Minami Tada who participated in the first Biennale from Japan. And the whole collection of the archive was donated to the National Archive and now hosted by the Art Gallery New South Wales. And I thought it's very interesting to look at the history of the Biennale, particularly from the 70s. And when there were so many quite sort of arguable performances are happening already. This is from 76 by Stelarc. And then also this is work by Fujiko Nakaya from 76, again from the second Biennale. And now she's showing this series of folk sculpture at the Tate and then also so many other places, and how much this history or practices fly beyond at the time over the course of 30 years. And so we can look at, for instance, some of the images from Joseph Beuys, who participated in Biennale 7 times, but never actually went to Sydney. And 79 version, the third version, was relationship between Australia and Europe. So it was called European Dialogue. So there was some regional focus in that time. But because Joseph Beuys couldn't come, but 1984, when René Bloch was one of the commissioner, he planted this fig tree on the garden of the Art Gallery New South Wales, and on behalf of Joseph Beuys. And now there is a huge, big tree of the fig still growing, and not many people knows it. But it's beautiful to know how the tree tells the story of the history. And some of the key elements in relationship with Aboriginal art from 1988 to make Aboriginal memorial, and then also some of the important figures like Nam June Paik, who was part of the Biennale, and in 1990, and that's now collection of the museum. So how this Biennale, of the history of the Biennale is in tandem with the development of contemporary art, and then also development of the institutions as well. And so I'm planning to have sort of display of the archive so that gives you a context for coming Biennale, so that biennial is now everywhere, and then you think just automatically every 2 years biennial comes. But the Biennale of Sydney didn't come so automatically at the first stage. It started in 73 and 76 and 79, 83. So first 4 happened every 3 years instead of 2 years. But they still call it the Biennale. And so I'm also starting this series called Archive Stories, and trying to bring back some of the important figures from the history who are still resident of the Sydney or Australia. They talk about what was it really like from 70s and then also 80s. And it's amazing to hear these open interviews that a lot of people remembers, but by showing some of the images, this forgotten time and also again emotion of the time are being triggered and the energies are coming back. So this is how I associate with the art history, and I truly enjoy it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mami. Well, at this point, I'm sure there are many questions from the audience, so maybe I can open up the floor to questions. Does anyone have a question at this point? No? Okay, not yet. Then maybe I'll start with a question maybe first for Guo Liang. There's often, you talked about appropriation and how art history informs your practice, but there's this, it's said that art practice or the art of an artist should be informed by art history, but not derived of it.
Yeah.
How do you make that kind of distinction?
I guess for me, I've been thinking a lot about like animation. Like, what does it mean to animate something? And you said something about archive. How do you give it energy back? And I think one of the difficulties, I mean, art history always feels very heavy, you know. And one of the things that happens a lot is if you go to art school, is that when students are extremely creative, and then you teach them art history, and they all kind of start to make things that looks like the thing you recommend them, right? And they get bogged down because this thing about inheriting something, appropriating something, I think it comes with terms and conditions. And so it doesn't mean that I know this artist means I can make work that is like this artist. It comes with terms and conditions, and you have to work your way creatively around those terms and conditions. So for me, I think a lot about if you take something that has been done before as a part of history, then how do you animate it? How do you bring the energy back? How do you bring life back into something? So I guess that is something that I think about and I don't go out trying to make something that looks like something. Sometimes it kind of happened. But it is quite important that I feel like if I am making something that has some kind of reference to history, that it feels alive, you know? So I mean, one of the questions I would ask is, you know, for example, like if you work with historical archive, what is a good way of using historical archive that makes archive feels alive, and what makes archive feels like really like dead? Yeah. Does it make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any questions at this point? No? Okay. Well, I have a question for all three of you. Well, earlier I spoke about the crisis that art history that's undergoing. And this is very much linked to the crisis of history itself, as you all know, of history as a dialectic, which is very much linked to modernism and modernity, history as an idea of progress. But now that we are beyond that stage, there's this understanding that there's nothing left for history to teach us. And the same goes for art history. What would your response be to something like that? especially for contemporary art, where history is no longer relevant, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, I guess like I kind of mentioned, it really depends. I think there are certain discourses that is better for describing certain types of work, right? I do think that obviously with paintings and sculptures, they kind of grew with the historical discourse. So, like as a painter or you make sculpture, sometimes, you do have to rely on certain historical discourse. But for example, if you do performative work, new media work, it has also other possible histories to describe this type of works. I guess sometimes I don't think of going to history to learn something. I think of going back to history, like I said, to be in the company of artists that I like. Like for example, if I don't come to the museum to learn about the history of art. I come to the museum to be in the presence of artworks. So I think there's like a little bit of a difference for me. Yeah.
I think when we were talking about linear history of Western development of modern and contemporary art, I really wanted to be out of that lineage. And so I wasn't sort of paying too much attention to the art history. But recently, when we are talking about multiple modalities and multiple histories, then everything is plural. And also we have access to different time and different geography, so that a lot of young people, I think, it's a sort of lost in overwhelmed information and fragments of the history. So I think it's now that really needs somebody to come in and have a larger picture, and it could be primarily, but we need bigger stories to begin with. Otherwise, it just being lost and playing around is a fragment of different parts of the geography and then also time. And it's an interesting moment to have these accessibilities, but also, I think history is becoming probably more important than before.
So, what I think Gao Minglu's writing of art history is so important is because he's one of the first in Chinese, among Chinese art historians who started to put this like all histories actually are contemporary, which means we need to revisit history not just to study the facts or historical facts. Actually, we are interpret all the facts and to make connection which is of contemporary relevance. So that's why I think Gao or other people who follow him, when they are writing their history or they are revisiting the history, they are actually doing a continuous process of critical thinking. So that's why at the very, very, very first stage of my unfinished speech, that the importance to revisit the classical art history, the painting history of Chinese painting, because that's a typical writing that is with a critical point of view, which is quite relevant to contemporary life, everything.
Thank you. Yes, Mr.
Thank you very much to all the panelists for a very good speech. Learned a lot from this session. I'd just like to basically bring the idea that Guo Liang has given us. Guo Liang has said that when he comes to a museum, he's not here to learn about art history, he's here to learn about art. But we've also seen how Kataoka's work has given us so much more to learn about the works of the artists through what I saw was really an exhibition of art history. So I would just like to maybe pose this question. I think from a National Gallery point of view, also we are always thinking about these issues like this. How much of it should go into art and how much of it should go into exhibition that makes sense of the art history? And you as the chief curator of Mori Art Museum, what makes you devote so much of your resources and time in doing the works that you have just shown us?
I think more than art itself or more than history itself, I'm more interested in the human beings and different artists from different time. Why did he do this? Why did she associate with this issue? And so everything that they do personally is reflection of the time and social, political, cultural background. So if you are looking at only at the painting in a museum, you can only talk about aesthetics and maybe you find some stories. But what we are facing now in all this globalized time, you have more opportunities to encounter with works coming from completely unfamiliar region and also unfamiliar time. So how do you communicate with this piece of art? It's not about only from the visual sort of stimuli, but also has to be together with the context. And I just wanted to give a context to my audience so that they have a better understanding of, again, the energy of the time, why and when and how, and all this, so much more behind the painting, so much more behind the wall that have been hidden. And curator tends to know all of that. And even with the living artist, because curator does visit the studios, and some of the studio visits are so interesting because you see all these elements of the resources where these artists get their inspirations from. And so I try to tell a story whenever I give a gallery talk. And a lot of people say, oh, that's so interesting after I hear your talk. So I wanted to give all these background stories to everyone who come to the museum. So that's why I started to create this special room to give a context to the works.
Mommy, can I just ask you, because from the images I can't tell, is these rooms usually a separate section from the display of the artworks?
Normally, I do it in the middle of the exhibition.
Okay.
You don't want to start with sort of didactic of the history, but you don't want to not knowing until very end of the show. Yes. So there is one area which has a low ceiling and difficult place to install major works. So it's a physical restriction too of the space. That so you see a little bit of the space and you see a little bit of the works. And then encounter this volume of the information, and then you keep going on.
Because I think it's an essential question of like experience and reading, and I think that and I'm not against reading. I think I do need some context and some reading. I think it's a question of how do you present it in a way where you can still experience while reading. I think that is something which I think that's a museum display strategy.
Yeah, I think also curator writes lengthy text to explain all this context in exhibition catalogs. And when you're writing this exhibition essay for the catalog, who actually reads these texts? I want to tell the story to everyone at least, so that physically if you encounter with this room, and there are more chance for the people to even just to look at the fragments of the reference images, so that maybe some of the painting coming afterwards make more sense than not looking at.
Okay, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we've run off time for this afternoon session. I'm very sorry. I know that. So please join me in thanking the speakers again. And thank you all for coming this afternoon. Thank you.